This was, to be sure, the home of the free and the land of the brave. Americans were free simply because the government was too weak to intervene in the private affairs of the people. It did not have the money to do so, and they were brave because a free people is always venturesome. The obligation of freedom is a willingness to stand on your own feet. The early American wanted it that way. He was wary of government, especially one that was out of his reach. He had just rid himself of a faraway and self-sufficient political establishment, and he was not going to tolerate anything like it in his newly founded country. He recognized the need of some sort of government to keep order, to protect him in the exercise of his rights, and to look after his interests in foreign lands. But he wanted it understood that the powers of the government would be clearly defined and be limited. It could not go beyond specified limits. It was in recognition of this fear of centralized power that the Founding Fathers put into the Constitution, it never would have been ratified without them, very specific restraints on the federal government. In other matters, the early American was willing to put his faith in home government, in a government of neighbors, in a government that one could keep one's eye on and, if necessary, lay one's hands on. For that reason, the United States was founded as a union of separate and autonomous commonwealths. The states could go in for any political experiments the folks might want to try out, even socialism for that matter, but the federal government had no such leeway. After all, there were other states nearby, and if a citizen did not like the way one state government was managing its affairs, it could have moved across the border. The threat of competition would keep each state from going too far in making changes or in intervening in the lives of the citizens. The Constitution, then, kept the federal government off balance and weak. A weak government is the corollary of a strong people. The 16th Amendment changed all of that. In the first place, by enabling the federal government to put its hands into the pockets and pay envelopes of the people, it drew their allegiance away from their local governments. It made them citizens of the United States rather than of their respective states. Theft loyalty followed theft money, which was then taken from them not by their local representatives over whom they had some control, but by the representatives of the other 47 states. They became subject to the will of the central government, and their state of subjection was emphasized by every increase in the income tax levies. The state governments likewise lost more and more of their autonomy. Not only was their source of revenue being dried up by federal preemption so that they had less and less for the social services the government should provide, but they were compelled in their extremity to apply to the central authorities for help. In doing so, they necessarily gave up some of their independence. They found it difficult to stand up to the institution from which they had to beg grants and aid. Furthermore, the federal government was in a position to demand subservience from the state governments as a condition for subventions. It has now become politically wise for governors, legislators, and congressmen to play ball with the central government. They have been reduced to being procurement officers for the citizens who elect them. The economic power which the federal government secured by the 16th Amendment enabled it to bribe the state governments as well as the citizens into submission to its will. In that way, the whole spirit of the Union and of its Constitution has been liquidated. Income taxation has made the United States as completely centralized a nation as any that went before it. The very kind of establishment the Founding Fathers abhorred was set up by this simple change in the tax laws. This is no longer the home of the free, and what bravery remains is traceable to a tradition that is fast losing ground. For those of us who still believe that freedom is best, the way is clear. We must concentrate on the correction of the mistake of 1913. The 16th Amendment must be repealed. Nothing less will do. For it is only because it has this enormous revenue that the federal government is able to institute procedures that violate the individual's rights to himself and his property. Enforcement agencies must be paid. With the repeal of this amendment, the socialistic measures visited upon us these past 30 years will vanish. The purchase of elections with federal money will no longer be possible, and the power and dignity of the home governments will be restored. This measure should be supported by the governors and legislators of all the states. Every state in the Union now contributes in income taxes to the federal government more than it gets back in grants and aid. This is inevitable because the cost of maintaining the huge federal machinery must come out of the taxes before the citizen can get anything. With the abolition of the income taxation, the states will be better able to serve its citizens, and because the state governments are closer and more responsive to the will of the people, there is greater chance that the citizens will get their full dollar's worth in services. However, the principal argument for the repeal of the 16th Amendment is that only in that way can freedom from an interventionist government be restored to the American people. J. Bracken Lee, Governor of Utah, 1954. And with that, I hope you enjoyed celebrating Independence Day this year, my fellow autists. That was the introduction to a little ditty called Income Tax, the Root of All Evil, written in 1954 by Frank Chodorov. I am going through my reading of said document right now, providing my thoughts and annotations. It's a real short read. I just started reading it over my lunch break at work. Going to do an episode where I read it sort of front to back, similar to how I did No Treaty, part of the Unabomber's Manifesto, and some of Tolstoy's works as well. I think in the roadmap of anarchist sort of literature, I think No Treason stands at the pinnacle. You read that first because that sort of opens your mind to the idea that the Constitution, while it was stood up and created with the best of intentions, fails and falls on its face. It falls completely short in preventing the system of government that we have today. And actually, in the very fiery sort of afterthought that the author provided, he basically says it has been either powerless to prevent or has enabled the system of government we have today. And mind you, this is just like post Civil War. And it is unfit to exist, simply to serve as like kindling for the fire, I think were his words. But No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority, helps sort of plant the seeds in your mind that nobody and nothing on this earth gives you rights. You're born with them, whether you believe that your God granted you to them or that simply because you are human, you are entitled to these rights that nothing on this planet has. Either way, you're right. Nothing, no man, no group of people, no piece of paper, no matter how many pieces of paper, can possibly add, subtract, or edit the natural rights you are born with. No Treason does a good job at sort of pointing that out and really dissecting parts of the Constitution that really fall short of safeguarding that sort of thought. And I think that's really neat because you have a lot of people who consider themselves like quote unquote constitutionalists when they're, asked, are you red or blue? Are you Republican or Democrat? And while I do think that's better than red or blue, if we're talking in terms of least worst evil, the next extreme, like the most extremist thought is obviously like an anarchist thought is that fuck any piece of paper that tries to tell me what my rights are. I don't need that. And that's just in short why I think No Treason is the best sort of starting point if you're going to go down this road of, maybe some anarchist thought. And then I would add this piece, Income Tax, the Root of All Evil. It's a free PDF. You can look it up online and read it for free. It's like 80 pages. Goes right after that because it just goes into further detail about how the Constitution further fell flat on its face with the adding of the Income Tax Amendment and the 16th Amendment, and how words and definitions and legal precedent and everything was just twisted and manipulated and mutated to get forced through so that the government can just line its pockets and become a for-profit sort of company. And there's also doubles back into a lot of the same sentiment that Lysander Spooner and Tolstoy also talked about regarding natural rights, the human soul, and how government sort of violates all those principles by and large. But that's a very fiery introduction to the latter work, and I highly encourage you read it. And if you don't, I'm going to read it hopefully starting next episode. I might split it up into two, but I figured that was fitting on this Independence Day holiday I enjoy more and more as I have completely disassociated government from this country. If you love this country, you must hate your government. You cannot do both. It's like understanding history. You cannot understand history and trust government. It's just not how it works. They're completely They're diametrically opposed from each other. It just does not exist unless you are clinically insane. Excuse me. And so, as we kick off this 4th of July, or as I kicked off this 4th of July, I went back, as I always do every year, and watched Tim Dillon's speech, What Being an American Means to Him. And I did a little post and a story of some of my favorite sort of jokes and not jokes, some very serious lines in there as well. Because I find that video absolutely hilarious, gets me fired up. It's on par with that like Joey Diaz sort of speech where he wakes up to the national anthem playing and he starts monologuing and ranting. But without further ado, this is what being an American means to me. Being an American means to me wishing death or extreme harm upon a politician and their family at the slightest inconvenience. It means shouting, I wish the FBI kidnapped my fucking governor every time I hit a pothole that rattles my car to its frame. It means fighting tooth and nail for every second of free time you get between sleep, work, and your commute to do things that are just fun. It means going outside and enjoying nature and sunlight and all of the amazing things that come with this beautiful planet that we're on. It means carrying around a fully loaded Glock 19 pointed directly at your junk and having a great time doing it, an even better time doing it, while walking through the doors of the store with a no weapon sign hanging on it. It means constantly laughing at cities like Chicago, New York, any city in California and those like it, for being prime examples as to why government will only fail in the end. Being an American to me means not having to worry about sorting out recycling and trash. It all goes to the same place at the end of the day. Being an American to me means leaving the AC on 68 or 65 degrees, whether it be on accident or on purpose, as I go to work, and not having to worry about it because I know I can do the same thing tomorrow. Being an American to me means joking, half joking, or not joking at all about committing tax fraud, because it's morally just and absolutely hilarious. Being an American to me means being my absolute angriest and ready to fly off the handle at any second, the second I jump behind the wheel of a car and become the most dangerous thing on this planet, going 80 plus miles an hour down a freeway. Being an American to me means going on a road trip and knowing there is not a single place where I can eat food that won't kill me, give me cancer, or cause explosive diarrhea. Being an American to me means getting into new wars or future wars because we gotta keep gas prices down, and that's all worth it. Being an American to me means refusing to drink tea at every opportunity I get, even when it doesn't make sense, simply out of principle. Being an American to me means making fun of the British at every single opportunity. Being an American to me means making fun of Canada at every single opportunity. Being an American to me means when a deadly or quote-unquote deadly virus finds its way to our shores, I make fun of all those wearing masks and who got vaccinated because that was gay. Being an American to me means every time there's a national tragedy, I watch the headline and I watch the news and I go, what will they think of next? My federal government, what will my tax dollars go to next? Being an American to me means despite bombs raining down on other countries, whether we funded them or not, and whether the likelihood of a nuke dropping on our heads at any given moment is, greater than ever, I still do everything I possibly can to get on a boat, on a lake, and drink. Being an American to me means making every excuse for rioters in another state that I'll never step foot in, enabling them to burn down their own city and loot it in the name of justice and what's right. Being an American to me means watching cities on fire every summer and thinking, we can make a shirt out of that. Being an American to me means absolutely refusing to return anything I bought online that I don't want, despite living in a time where returning something is easier than ever before. Being an American to me means Distributors of vigilante justice are greater heroes than public servants. Being an American to me means getting an education through musicians more so than those who are paid to teach. Being an American to me means every 4 years having to remind my elders that when they watched Star Wars, they rooted for the rebels, not the Empire. Being an American to me means buying a 3D printer just so I can print automatic firearms and firearm components just to make the state as hopeless in their cause against me as they think I feel against them. Being an American to me is finding a way around the ban on pornography that a state may have put on you. Shout out, Texas. The ingenuity is hilarious. Being an American to me means finding more and more dangerous ways to stay physically active and fit. Because a traditional gym in which you're throwing around hundreds of pounds isn't enough. Finding out how to turn your body into a weapon is obviously the next step through mixed martial arts. And then eventually finding my way into firearms, because that's fucking cool. Being an American to me means finding a way to do that at night in the complete darkness, and going into crippling debt to do so. Being an American to me means living in a country where a firearm manufacturer can say it's 100% safe, despite the fact that there are hundreds of videos and examples of it going off and bullets going through people's legs and testicles. Being an American to me means the rejection of all electric vehicles because they're gay. Being an American to me means watching hundreds of YouTube videos and going down the rabbit hole of dozens of Reddit threads to find the most devastating round I can shoot suppressed and as quiet as possible in my house to determine which gun I should use as the bedside gun, and then changing said gun every other month. Being an American to me means carrying a gun and 40 plus rounds of ammunition without any medical on me. Because I am the main character. I'm not going to get hit. Being an American to me means refusing to put away my clean laundry. I just went through the effort of cleaning it. I'm not folding it and putting it back. Being an American to me means rejecting all country music because it's fake, gay, and retarded. It's not rebellious. It's kind of submissive. Being an American to me means doing whatever somebody says I can't do because I should be able to do it. Being an American to me means doing burnouts and wheelies on public roads, endangering no one but myself because there's nothing wrong with that. Being an American to me means running every red light and stop sign that's put in a really stupid area. Being an American to me means speed limits are truly just suggestions. And if you're going the speed limit, but I'm going faster than you, get the fuck out of the left lane. Being an American to me means pointing my X300 Turbo out the window and at the truck behind me whose high beams are on, shooting laser beams directly into my corneas. Being an American to me means celebrating the day in which Paul Pelosi was hit in the head with a hammer. Being an American to me means being able to say whatever the fuck I want. And being able to say whatever the fuck I want despite the fact that censorship is at an all-time high and only increasing more and more each day. Being an American to me is complaining about the state of this place, but still knowing that it is the best place on Earth, and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. Being an American to me means finding the best way to enjoy this life and having fun in a moral and strong manner. Being an American to me is looking at my neighbors and my friends and knowing that we're all in this together. It's you and I, buddy. We're gonna figure it out. Finally, being an American to me means on our country's birthday, we light off Chinese-made rockets into the sky to pollute the airwaves, fuck up the birds, while we get absolutely plastered driving jet skis, boats, cars, and motorcycles alike, being rebellious little hooligans just like our forefathers. I think on that note, I'm obviously, some of the jokes, half jokes, not jokes at all. I'll let you figure out which one is which. Going back to the founding, like our forefathers, our founding fathers, these guys were just your average kids, your young men, young adults who had average jobs, farmers, blacksmiths, they were businessmen. They were men just trying to make it for themselves in the new world. And more each day and every year, the government that they were under kept stepping on their necks more and more. Until finally there was a breaking point in which the majority said, enough is enough. It's time to lay hands on them, like the introduction to that paper said. And something to keep in mind, an important note that does get forgotten about. Obviously, we celebrate this 4th of July and our victory and how amazing and awesome it is that we defeated the world's greatest superpower at the time. A lot of unspoken and immeasurable suffering was experienced by the rebels. They were imprisoned, tortured, killed, their families imprisoned, tortured, killed, their homes taken from them, burned down, all of their possessions just gone. Everything that they worked for in this new nation that they went over to start a new life in was taken from them. That's the cost of fighting for freedom. That's the costs and the price that people pay to live on their own 2 feet freely and not on their knees as slaves. And they had to have been willing to go into that knowing that they may not be able to see the other side of that. They may not be able to see the fruits of their labor. But in accepting that, they still acknowledge that it would be better for the next generation to do so at their cost. I think that's what's truly amazing. Yes, the feat of beating the British Army and the Crown is cannot be understated how big of a deal that is. But the moral and the mental battle that every single man, woman who partook in the rebellion had to, go through, the terms that they had to come within themselves before getting involved, astounding, I would say, even more so. Because we have a very long way to go in this country, I think, before a critical mass comes to the same conclusion that those brave men came to. Too many people still are reliant and expectant of the state to do things, to fix things, to be the good guy, to get this country back on the right track, quote unquote. Too many people complied during COVID, and obviously much less now after. I think their hand was sort of tipped and we got a little peek behind the veil a little bit, and many became disillusioned, but not nearly enough. Still, way too many people are beholden to the paradigm that government is the only way. That government will be the omnipotent fixture in our society that will fix all things, despite history, despite the fact that they've been around since, we rebelled against the British. And every single year since the standing up in the existence of our own government, things have only been going downhill. And every quote unquote remedy for a problem is simply, well, it's just like our pharmaceutical industry, where interventions are created to simply suppress symptoms rather than to address the root cause. That is the best analogy I can give for every bill, every political intervention, every election, every office that stood up, any initiative the government takes. It is simply a means to suppress the symptoms, the negative side effects of the very things that they've created, rather than to address the root causes. That's why our roads are crumbling. That's why our infrastructure sucks. That's why the power goes out at every slight breeze. That's why everything floods like the river in Texas, which is an absolute tragedy, by the way. There is no way that they could possibly keep you safe. And yet they still enslave you. They still take from you taxes. They still enforce bullshit laws that make it harder and harder for you to live for yourself and for your community. And yet they provide nothing. They're more of a detriment than a help. And I think we're now sort of seeing why. I think civilizations only last around 250 years. This is a little bleak. I promise to turn around after this. But I think that is just the natural cycle for a people under a government to realize that they are more of a detriment than a cure. And then in order to try to fix that mindset, the government has to do a lot of really stupid, silly shit. Again, really just being more of a band-aid solution than an actual cure. And the snake eats the tail over and over again until the government is completely useless, unable to defend its people, and someone else comes in, or the society sort of eats itself from the inside. But one way or another, in this case, I do believe technology helped the people of this country sort of realize the uselessness of their representatives. And with more and more coming out every day, and just everyone getting hammered by the facts of these people lying to you, hiding things from you, and stealing from you, more and more people are sort of getting the hint that those who are quote unquote servants of the people of the United States are really not what they say they are, and are frauds and unfit to manage the local fast food chain in anyone's neighborhood, as I like to say. With that being said, again, like I've always said, I still wouldn't live anywhere else, because here, with the attitude of rebellion, since our revolution is still new, since by some miracle it's still taught in schools and being perpetuated by subcultures here and there, we have the best opportunity to do something about the state of this place compared to any other nation on the planet, I would think. Part of that is, yeah, because behind every blade of grass, there is a gun. Behind every door, there's several guns on average, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. But also because I truly do think at people's core, no one wants to be taken advantage of. Nobody wants to be the victims of thievery or murder. And so I think naturally, human nature would have it that we would want to shed ourselves from this parasite. I've said time and time again when talking about natural rights and, being just good, moral people, everyone, as long as you're not born like a sociopath, has a sense of the golden rule, do unto others what you would do to yourself. We have an innate sense of what is right and wrong and fair. And so this government existing and doing and being the beast that they are now and how overtly they operate now, it's not fair. It's an abomination and sort of a disgrace to the laws of nature, if you will. And so I think the natural tendency and the natural course will be to shed it. However that looks, however that plays out, I don't know. But I think that it is in our DNA as Americans. Remember, it's your birthright. It is your history to rebel. When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes duty. And I do like that. I like that a lot. I like living in the nation of rebels, of punks, not of patriots, not of people who fight for their government anymore. That's done. I think that time is past. I think most of the world and those not watching Fox News or CNN are aware that we have not fought in a war that was just or that could have possibly been justified for our democracy, for our freedoms, since, World War II. You'd have a very hard time proving otherwise. And a lot of vets come back and they realize that as well. They've been disillusioned. They realize that why the fuck was I fighting in the sandbox for X number of years? This wasn't for the safety of America. This is for politicians who only got exponentially richer from all of this bullshit. And they realize that they've fucked themselves up mentally and physically beyond repair for what? Not for you and I or their families back home. That's something that, again, whether through technology, whether through the natural course of living under a government for 200 plus years, people start to realize that this isn't right. Something is not natural here. By going over to the wars, did we create a better sense of security here? Do things feel safer? Are people happier? Are people healthier? Are they able to afford more? No. And yet, I love this place. I love this place because I can still do what I want without fear, by and large. Because again, I'm not going around putting other people's lives at risk. I'm not going around violating the natural rights of other people. And I do like the prospect of living just next door to the possible person who's in charge of me, whether it be a local representative, whether it be a federal one. I like the ability to know that their doorstep is on the same dirt that I live on. Maybe that's what they're trying to go to the moon. You can send them. We don't want them here. And I say all this just to sort of, stay in the vein of why, 1776 happened, why this holiday is a thing. Because there's a lot of internal things, a lot of internal, mental math and struggles and uncomfortable truths that people had to wrestle with back then that I think are becoming a little more and more apparent today. And I think that's why we've seen the dive into just insanity, whether it be with horoscopes or angel numbers or complete cultist like fealty to political parties. They're shortcuts for the human mind to make sense of and deal with this pretty, mangled reality that we live in, because we're expected to live in this sort of system, this organization that doesn't feel natural at all, where lies are supposed to be believed as truths, or else you're basically flogged in front of the town square for not believing it. You're a conspiracy theorist, you're an anti Semite, whatever it is, despite the fact that there's proof that your side and that whatever the fuck the state's putting out is just blatant bullshit. But if you don't believe it, you're just an outcast of society. That sort of that's obviously just like a top-down view of many things, but like apply that to the war in the Middle East, apply it to the war in Ukraine, apply it to what happened during COVID, apply that to anything, right? To think that whatever the state's solution and talking point is correct is usually a contradiction to what is naturally right and occurring within nature. And so it's no secret that after a while, people are going to start to lose their minds a little bit when forced to live in this sort of box that really only exists within itself. If you put that system or that thought, that school of thought in any other setting, it would not stand on its own. And so people do. That's not a surprise that people probably start to lose their minds a little bit and find shortcuts and ways of coping with that. Do I think we're nearing a breaking point? I don't know. I'm not. I don't consider myself a historian. I don't consider myself, the man on the street. I don't consider myself the voice of anything. Really, this is just my observations and my thoughts. But I do feel the pendulum swinging. It was Dave Smith when he was talking about the really stupid choice for Trump to get us involved in the Israel versus Iran conflict. He said, "I'm tired of people, calling me a centrist," and I'm obviously sort of just like quoting. I'm not quoting this directly. Said he was tired of like Rogan, of Fox and CNN, other voices, in the podcast for calling him a centrist because he doesn't identify with either party. But he mentioned that centrist implies that you are still basing your, you're still basing your thoughts, your talking points, your beliefs off of political parties. And he said, I don't want to be tied to that at all. That doesn't make sense. Again, I'm paraphrasing here. He called himself an anarchist.
Or maybe they've heard me a couple times, but they don't like know me that well. But they would say that, and I got this comment a lot. They would say that what they like about me is that I'm a centrist. A lot of people would go like, I like that Dave comes on and just like, it's just common sense centrist stuff. And it's funny because I am not at all a centrist. Like that is not at all what I am. I am far more radical than just, I don't think there's anyone, with the exception of Michael Malice, Tom Woods and guys like that. But at this point, like I do the rounds of like the big shows, probably even more than those guys do. But like I don't know that there's anyone, maybe like depending on how you look at it, some like Nick Fuentes maybe, but I'm trying to think like who is actually more radical than me in their political views. I mean, I am I'm an ANCAP. Like I'm an anarchist. I don't, you know what I mean? I know I'm also like a pragmatic anarchist. So like I don't think that like the governments are going to be abolished anytime soon, and we'll just have a market economy for government. I'm not saying that's going to happen anytime soon, but like I do think that is the correct position. But I would certainly, like I don't know, eliminate 90% of the federal government if I had, my way right now today. That's not a centrist position or a moderate position. And yet I get called both those things a lot when I'll go on Rogan or like a big show. I get called moderate and centrist. And I think what it is that people go like they kind of use that as a placeholder for common sense. They just mean like, oh, he's not like a Democrat or a Republican. He's not like a liberal or a conservative. He's just talking common sense. And so that's kind of like the, but the funny thing is that it's like in, like where they say in the land of the blind, the man with one eye is king or something like that. It's like, well, in the land of an insane establishment, the radical is the only one talking common sense.
And that was the first time I had heard a very large voice in the political sphere. Um, Again, podcasts have 10x the number of viewers that Fox and CNN have at prime time. And Dave Smith has been right about many things since the beginning. COVID, the Israeli war, the Ukraine war. He's been on top and ahead of a lot of the talking points that most people are. And for him to then say, and he's right, because when you have major news stations, when you have Ben Shapiro, when you have huge radio talk show hosts going after you for your talking points on the Israel-Palestine conflict, you're probably in the right. For him to then say, I consider myself an anarchist, and to use those words, I think represents a very large shift in the sort of landscape, in the sphere that people have to sort of dip their toes in when talking about politics. That represents a huge distortion and a huge change. And we'll see what happens. Maybe the government sort of slinks back into their hole and tries to be a little less, pervasive. And while that's obviously objectively good thing, it's not enough if they're still around, collecting taxes like we talked about earlier and whatnot. Maybe enough just to the point for us to forget about all the horrible shit, and they come back to right, even worse than where they were originally. Um, but I don't know. This is all a huge question mark. All I know is what's right, what's morally right. I know what fulfills me. Um, and I know that in every case throughout history, when given the opportunity, the government will jump on it. They'll take more from you and they won't give it back. I know that in every case of, mass murders, of acts of terrorism, of horrific acts done against other humans, the governments of this world have violated and have been the perpetrators of all of that, more so than anyone on the planet, more so than religious groups, more so. And most of the time, religious groups are tied in with government, so they count as government. I count the nation of Israel. I count a lot of the ISIS and other bullshit as governments as well, because they want to establish their own nation. They want to establish, a form of organizing society. They are a government in that sense. Governments have been the largest perpetuators of mass murder, rape, theft, all throughout history. That cannot be disputed. That's a fact, period. And so knowing that, constantly positioning myself against authority, against governments, again, without stepping on the toes of my neighbor, without violating the natural rights of those around me, I know I'm aligned on the side of good. And I think that is the natural progression people are going to have to take when they start down the path of, wow, I really don't like what my government did. I think that's just where you end up naturally. Maybe you pick up a couple dozen guns and body armor and helmets and night vision along the way. Up to you, right? Um, but that's why I like this place. There's still a sense of uneasiness when it comes to that. When it comes to when you ask somebody, where do you land on the political spectrum, right? There is a chance, it's a small chance, that you get hang 'em all in return. And that is the mentality your founding fathers had. Hang 'em all, because whatever the consequences may be, whatever price I have to pay, I would do anything to live in freedom. Freedom absolute, freedom in the most dangerous sense possible, knowing that anything in the realm of within the realm of possibility could happen to me. It is according to nature or God or whatever you believe that I exercise my natural rights unimpeded. I live for myself and for my community however I choose to. Again, comfort or freedom is greater than comfort, one of the pillars of this show. That's why this whole topic is completely tied back to that pillar. The founding fathers they wanted the most dangerous form of freedom possible because they knew without it, with any guardrails, with anyone watching over to make sure they were doing things a certain way, it was not freedom. You were still a slave to some degree, and they did not want any of that. And obviously, standing up the Constitution and creating a form of government ended up doing exactly that. Again, the Constitution was created with the best of intentions. However, it ignored the nature of people in government when it was stood up, and then as it was further raped and violated as more amendments were tacked on, and more power was given to the federal government via the Constitution. But there's a reason why people feel most alive when they sort of walk that line and are flirting with death, right? That's why I bought a motorcycle, to be fair. It is, you feel an intense amount of, in crazy amount of joy and just peace and just awe for everything around you when you're on it. It's probably the same reason why people skydive or why people free climb mountains or why people do other insane shit, right? Like, you, in that moment, there is nothing but you and whatever you are doing. And then if you ignore what you're doing or you have a lapse of judgment, you die. That's it. I think these are obviously very extreme examples. Those tasks, those things are a true expression of absolute freedom. I think that's why people love them. I think that's why people are addicted to them so much. Not because people necessarily want to flirt with death, but somewhere subconsciously in our DNA, whether it be as humans, I do think it's a human thing, but in this case, because it's the 4th of July, because we are Americans, while exercising and while doing acts where we express true, absolute, dangerous, unencumbered freedom, we find ourselves the happiest. We find ourselves most at peace, despite the fact that death is right behind our shoulder. I think that is a testament to how absolute freedom is in accordance with nature. It's an almost unexplainable feeling. Words will never be able to do justice for it. Not everyone's going to understand it because everyone's different. There's going to be different things that sort of float everyone's boat in that sense. But I do feel I would go out on a limb and I would bet that is a universal thing that once over the fear, once finding the particular act that is, to your liking, when partaking in acts of absolute freedom, one feels the most alive, the most fulfilled, and the most at peace. Despite the fact that death is an inch, a second, a moment away. that is so incredible. That gives me so much hope, knowing that that is a universal thing. Hell, shooting guns, let's just say, since that's sort of where we are. This is the special interest that the fellow autists, punks, and rebels here enjoy. That gun can be turned on you. The guy behind you can turn a gun on you. A ricochet can happen. Someone over the berm can send a 30 caliber round over it and dome one of you. You know, again, I'd say a lot of us feel pretty damn alive when we're running and gunning and just joking around with each other and having a good time shooting at trash, right? But that universal experience being so true across the board brings a lot of joy and hope to me, knowing that given the natural progression of societies and peoples realizing that their governments are more of a detriment than a benefit, and then understanding that true expressions of freedom, bringing the most joy and fulfillment to people, those things existing in the same space in the same timeline, one will have to give eventually. um, and those are just my thoughts on this 4th of July. So hopefully when you were out enjoying the fireworks, when you were out drinking and shooting and doing whatever it is that fulfills you, know that you are your most happiest then and tomorrow and the years hopefully you live afterwards. You're at your happiest when you are free to do what you want with the people you want to do it with, unencumbered by anything. That's what makes you American. The desire to want to do that makes you American as well. And your willingness to safeguard that for yourself and future generations, that's what being an American means to me, to bring it on home, I guess. So, with that, happy 4th of July, my fellow autists, punks, rebels, whatever you consider yourself. I hope it was a good one for you. Party's not over, though. For those who know, we always have a little week after 4th of July throwdown the following weekend. So the Full Metal family will be getting together to do some really stupid shit on a body of water. We're probably not going to be able to record. There's going to be too many people, too much noise. But we should get some good shots, videos, and whatnot. And hopefully those will find their way to YouTube or Instagram as well. But until then, happy Freedom Day. Make every day a Freedom Day if you can. And stay metal. Thank you.